My name is Erla Moore. I'm 36 years old. 20 years ago, my parents kicked me out of the house because I got pregnant in 10th grade. I was 16. It was a cold November night. Rain was falling hard, and I stood on the front porch with a single suitcase while my mother pointed toward the door and told me I was no longer their daughter. She said I was dead to them. That same night, my parents signed documents removing me from the family entirely legally and socially. The papers made it clear that I had no place in the Moore family anymore. Not me, and not any child I might ever have. I kept those papers. I kept everything. For the next 20 years, I lived like someone who had been erased. To everyone who knew my parents, I had simply moved abroad. That was the story they told. They said I had left the country, started a new life somewhere far away, and while people admired their respectable reputation, they had no idea that reputation was built on the silence surrounding the daughter they had thrown away. Then last week my parents appeared at my door. They looked nervous, almost eager, and they were smiling in a way that felt completely unfamiliar. They said they wanted to reconnect. But the real reason they came was much simpler. They wanted to meet their grandson. Apparently, they had been talking about him for months, telling friends, church members, and business associates about the grandson who represented the future of the Moore family. Nearly 200 of their most important friends were expected at a celebration they were hosting, and they had already promised everyone that their grandson would be there. They even offered me $250,000 to bring him. What they didn't realize was that the grandson they had been promising everyone didn't exist, and what they discovered instead would destroy everything they had spent 50 years building. Before we continue, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel, but only if this story truly resonates with you. I'd love to know where you're hearing this from, so please leave your city in the comments. Now I'll take you back to where it all began. Portland, Oregon, November 2004. I was 16 years old, a sophomore at St. Helena's Academy, and the youngest child of Daniel and Vivian Moore. On paper, we looked like the perfect family. My father owned a successful real estate law firm downtown called Moore and Langley, established in 1987. My mother had served as president of the school's parent association for 4 straight years. Every Sunday morning, we sat together in the front pew at Redemption Fellowship Church, dressed in coordinated outfits my mother carefully chose every Saturday night. From the outside, we looked like a model family, but every family has its own hierarchy, and I learned mine early. My older brother Andrew was 22, and, in his 3rd year of dental school, he was the pride of the family, the son who would carry on the Moore name. My sister Claire was 20 and studying to become a teacher. She was beautiful, well-mannered, and never questioned anything my parents said. And then, there was me. I was what my mother once called the surprise. She had me when she was 34, 6 years after she believed she was finished having children. I don't think she ever completely forgave me for disrupting the life she had already planned. The signs weren't dramatic, but they were always there. Family photos filled the living room walls, but somehow, my school portraits were never among them. Dinner conversations focused on Andrew's dental training or Claire's teaching placement. If I mentioned making the honor roll, my father would nod politely and say, "That's nice, Erla," before turning his attention back to Andrew. Over time, I learned to make myself small, not to ask for too much, not to need too much. My father had a saying he repeated at almost every family gathering. A reputation takes 20 years to build, he liked to say, and 5 minutes to destroy. Back then, I didn't realize how prophetic those words would become, or that one day I would be the 5 minutes he feared most. What you just heard was the emotional truth. The rest will contain some fictional elements and use AI to clarify the lesson and the underlying emotions. Hopefully, this resonates with you. If not, please allow yourself to rest early. I met Marcus Hale at the public library downtown. It doesn't sound like the kind of place where life-changing moments happen, but for me, that building was a refuge. The library was the only place in the city where no one compared me to my siblings or reminded me of expectations I could never meet. Inside those quiet aisles surrounded by books and the smell of old paper, I could exist without feeling like a disappointment. I started going there 3 afternoons every week. Officially, I told my parents I stayed after school to study. In reality, I went there to breathe. Sometimes I sat with textbooks open in front of me and didn't read a single word. I just enjoyed the silence and the feeling that for a few hours, no one expected anything from me. Marcus attended Lincoln High, the public school across town that my parents pretended didn't exist. In their world, students from Lincoln were the kind of people you drove past quickly with the car doors locked. Marcus was 17 tall and a little awkward with dark hair that always looked like he had run his hands through it too many times. After school, he worked part-time at his uncle's auto repair shop, which meant he often showed up to the library smelling faintly of motor oil and soap. He also had the kindest eyes I had ever seen. The first time we spoke, I was sitting in the biography section one October afternoon trying not to cry. My mother had forgotten to pick me up from school again. It was the third time that month. The rain had started outside, and I had walked the mile to the library because I didn't want to sit alone on the curb waiting for someone who probably wouldn't notice I was missing for another hour. I thought I was being quiet about it, but apparently, I wasn't. Marcus slid into the chair across from me and set a book down on the table. "Hey," he said gently. "You okay?" The question caught me so off guard that I couldn't answer right away. No one had asked me that in a long time. People asked about grades, about plans, about whether I was behaving the way I was supposed to. But no one asked if I was okay. I nodded quickly and wiped my eyes, embarrassed. "Yeah," I said. "I'm fine." Marcus didn't push. He just sat there for a moment, flipping open his book like he had planned to sit there all along. After a minute, he started talking about the book he was reading, something about a baseball player who had grown up poor and still made it to the major leagues. That was the beginning. After that day, we started seeing each other at the library almost every week. At first, we just talked between shelves or sat at the same table pretending to study. Eventually, those conversations turned into long walks after the library closed, then late evening phone calls when my parents were out. We dated secretly for 2 months. Marcus was patient in a way that felt unfamiliar to me. He never made fun of the things I worried about. He listened when I talked. Really listened, like the things I said mattered. When I was with him, I didn't feel like the extra child in a family that had already decided what success looked like. For the first time in my life, I felt like someone saw me. October 28th. 2004 is a date I will never forget. That afternoon, I stood inside the bathroom of a gas station 3 miles from my school, staring at a pregnancy test in my shaking hands. The fluorescent light above the mirror buzzed softly while cars pulled in and out of the pumps outside. 2 pink lines. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. For a long time, I just stared at the test, trying to convince myself I had read it wrong. I even turned it sideways like the answer might change if I looked at it from a different angle. It didn't. When I finally told Marcus later that evening, he didn't panic. He didn't make excuses or start talking about running away from the problem. Instead, he took both of my hands in his and held them tightly. "We'll figure it out," he said quietly. "Together." "You're not alone, Arla." I wanted to believe him. Part of me did. But I also knew my parents. I understood exactly what mattered most in their world. It wasn't love or forgiveness or the well-being of their youngest daughter. It was reputation. And I knew that when I told them the truth, their first question wouldn't be, "Are you okay?" Their first question would be, "What will people think?" After days of worrying about it, I decided to tell them during Sunday dinner. It was the one time every week when everyone was in the same room, when my father couldn't leave for a meeting and my mother couldn't disappear into phone calls. I thought it would be better to say it all at once quickly before I lost my nerve. I had no idea it would be the last meal I ever ate in that house. Sunday, November 14th, 2004, 7:32 p.m. The roast beef was overcooked. I remember that detail so clearly because I spent most of the dinner staring at my plate trying to gather the courage to speak, while my father complained about a property dispute involving one of his clients. Across the table, my mother was discussing which families would attend the church Christmas gala that year and which ones might cause problems with the seating arrangements. My brother Andrew was home for the weekend from dental school. My sister Claire had driven back from college earlier that afternoon. Everyone was talking about their own lives. No one noticed that my hands were shaking under the table. I looked down at the dry slice of roast beef on my plate and tried to force the words out of my mouth before I lost the chance. I didn't realize that once those words left my lips, everything in my life was about to change forever. I have something to tell you. The words came out quieter than I expected, but they were enough to stop every conversation at the table. 4 faces turned toward me. My parents. My brother Andrew, who was home from dental school for the weekend. My sister Claire, visiting from college. The room felt suddenly too small. I had rehearsed this moment a dozen times in my head, but now that it was happening, the words felt heavy in my mouth. I was 8 weeks pregnant. I couldn't hide it much longer, and every day I waited made the truth harder to say. I'm pregnant. My mother's fork slipped from her hand and clattered against her plate. My father didn't move. He sat there perfectly still, staring at me like he was trying to decide whether he had heard correctly. Finally, he spoke. Who is the father? His voice was calm, but there was something cold underneath it. Is it someone from St. Helena's? Someone we know? I shook my head. His name is Marcus Hale, I said. He goes to Lincoln High. The moment the words left my mouth, the air in the room changed. My mother's face drained of color. You've been seeing a boy from the public school, she asked slowly, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. He's a good person, Mom, I said quickly. He works after school, and my father cut me off before I could finish. What does his father do? He lives with his uncle, I answered. His uncle owns an auto repair shop. Marcus works there part-time. The silence that followed felt endless. Later, I realized it lasted exactly 11 seconds. I counted. Then my father stood up from the table. You will not keep it. My mother looked at him quickly. Daniel. She will not destroy everything we've built, he said flatly. He looked at me then, but not the way a father looks at his daughter. His expression was distant, almost clinical, like he was evaluating a problem that needed to be removed. If you keep that baby, he said, you are no longer part of this family. No one spoke after that. Dinner ended without another word. By 9:15 p.m., I was standing on the front porch with a single suitcase. Rain soaked through my sweater and dripped from my hair onto the wooden steps. The porch light buzzed above my head while the front door stood open behind me. It wasn't my father who pushed me out. It was my mother. She held the door open and pointed toward the driveway. Leave, she said. Her voice was steady. Andrew and Claire stood at the upstairs window watching everything happen. I could see their silhouettes against the light in the hallway. Neither of them came downstairs. Neither of them said a word. I walked 3 blocks in the rain before I reached the gas station on Mulberry Street. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely dial the number on the payphone. Marcus answered on the second ring. Arilla, what's wrong? They kicked me out, I said. For a moment he didn't say anything. Then he said, Stay there, I'm coming. 20 minutes later, an old pickup truck pulled into the gas station parking lot. The brakes squealed when it stopped. Marcus jumped out before the truck had even fully parked. He ran across the wet pavement, took off his jacket, and wrapped it around my shoulders. The warmth of it made me realize how cold I had been. I started crying before I could stop myself. He pulled me into his arms and held me while I shook. I've got you, he said quietly. "I've got you." The truth was, we had no idea what we were going to do next. Between us, we had $300 a pickup truck that barely worked, and nowhere to go. That was when Margaret Torres saved my life. Mrs. Torres lived 3 houses down from the Moore house. She was 62 years old, a retired schoolteacher who had lived on our street longer than my parents had. She was also the only person in the neighborhood who never acted like my father owned the entire block. She had seen me standing in the rain from her living room window. Later, she told me she had watched for several minutes before deciding to come outside, long enough to understand what was happening. When I knocked on her door that night, it was almost 10 o'clock. She opened the door wearing a cardigan and holding a mug of tea. "You can stay here," she said, before I even explained anything. "As long as you need." Those words felt like a miracle. Marcus and I stayed in Mrs. Torres's guest room for 2 weeks. She gave us blankets, hot meals, and more kindness than I had experienced in my own house in years. She never asked questions that made me feel ashamed. She just treated me like someone who deserved help. 2 weeks later, Marcus found a small studio apartment in Seattle. It was above a laundromat, barely big enough for a bed and a table, but it was ours. And that was the beginning of the life my parents had decided no longer belonged to them. The apartment cost $425 a month. It sat above a laundromat that smelled constantly of bleach damp fabric and something else I can only describe as secondhand hope. The machines downstairs rattled late into the night, and sometimes the entire floor vibrated when the heavy dryers started their cycle. It wasn't much, but it was ours, and at that point in my life, that felt like a miracle. The night my parents threw me out, they had already started preparing for my disappearance. I know that because 3 days later my father mailed me an envelope. Certified mail. Signature required. It felt less like a letter and more like a legal transaction. Inside was a document drawn up by my father's attorney. It stated that Erla Moore forfeited all rights to the Moore family estate, and that the Moore family held no legal or moral obligation toward me or any child I might have. The wording was cold, precise, and carefully written, the kind of language lawyers use when they want to make sure nothing can ever be misunderstood. I signed the delivery receipt at the post office and carried that envelope back to the apartment above the laundromat. I kept that paper. I have kept it for 20 years. My daughter Lily Hale was born on July 6, 2005 at Harborview Medical Center in Seattle. 7 pounds 4 ounces, 10 tiny fingers, 10 perfect toes. She had Marcus's brown eyes and my stubborn chin. She entered the world screaming at the top of her lungs, her tiny fists clenched like she was already prepared to fight for her place in it. I remember holding her for the first time and whispering quietly, "Good. Scream. Make them hear you." Even if they never listened. The first 5 years of Lily's life were a blur of survival. Marcus worked double shifts at a repair shop in Ballard, often leaving before sunrise and coming home long after dark. His hands were always rough and stained with grease, no matter how many times he scrubbed them. While he worked, I finished my GED and later started taking community college classes, usually 2 at a time, whenever Lily's schedule allowed it. Sometimes I studied while she slept beside me in her crib. Sometimes I balanced textbooks on the kitchen counter while cooking noodles for dinner. We lived on ramen peanut butter sandwiches and the day-old bread the bakery down the street sold for $1 a bag. Every dollar mattered. I learned how to sew patches onto worn jeans and jackets, so they would last another few months. Sometimes those patches needed patches of their own. I learned how to stretch a grocery budget until it felt like the money itself was begging for mercy. When Lily was born, I mailed a birth announcement to my parents. There was no response. On her first birthday, I sent them a photograph of her sitting in a high chair with frosting all over her face and a crooked little smile. Silence. By the time her second birthday came around, I stopped trying. Marcus and I never got married. Not because we didn't want to, but because life kept pushing that plan further and further into the future. We used to say we would do it someday. Someday when we had enough money for a proper wedding. Someday when things calmed down. Someday when life got easier. But someday has a way of moving farther away when you're busy surviving. On March 15th, 2010, everything changed. Marcus was driving home from a night shift when a delivery truck ran a red light on Aurora Avenue. The police officer who knocked on my door that morning said Marcus died instantly. He was 26 years old. Lily was 4. The life insurance policy Marcus had through work paid out $12,000. That was the entire value of a good man's life, according to the paperwork. $12,000. I was 22 years old, a single mother with a 4-year-old daughter, $12,000 in the bank, and absolutely no one to call for help. I could have given up then. A lot of people probably would have. But I didn't. Even before Marcus died, I had started taking small interior design jobs around the neighborhood. Nothing official at first. I decorated apartments for neighbors who couldn't afford professional designers. I rearranged living rooms and painted old cabinets and staged small homes for real estate agents who were willing to take a chance on a young mother with no credentials. People kept telling me the same thing. You have an eye for this. They said I had a way of making small spaces feel warm, like real homes, instead of temporary places people just pass through. After Marcus died, I threw myself into that work completely. Not because I loved it at first, but because my life depended on it. Every project meant rent paid for another month. Every recommendation meant groceries for another week. In 2012, everything shifted again. That was the year I met Eleanor Vance at a design workshop at Seattle Central College. She was 52 years old, recently retired from a major design firm where she had worked for nearly 3 decades as a creative director. From the way other designers spoke about her, it was clear she had built a reputation that most people in the industry spent their entire careers chasing. She attended the workshop because she said she was bored in retirement and looking for something interesting to do. If you think meeting Eleanor might be the moment that changes my entire life, leave a 1 in the comments below. Sometimes, one person believing in you can rewrite a story that everyone else already decided for you. For reasons I still don't completely understand, Eleanor chose me. She spent nearly 30 minutes flipping through the small portfolio I had brought to the workshop. Photos of apartments I had staged, living rooms I had rearranged with furniture borrowed from neighbors, before and after pictures of spaces most professional designers would have ignored. When she finished, she looked up at me and said something that changed everything. You have talent. I remember blinking at her like she had mistaken me for someone else. It's raw. She continued tapping one of the photos with her finger. Unpolished. But it's real. You understand how people live in spaces. That's something a lot of designers never learn. Then she leaned back in her chair and said, "Let me help you shape it." 2 years later, in 2014, with Eleanor's mentorship and a $50,000 SBA loan that took me 3 attempts to secure, I started my company. I called it Hearth Home Interiors. Our first office wasn't really an office at all. It was a converted storage closet inside a shared workspace building. The room was barely large enough for a desk, 2 chairs, and a shelf filled with fabric samples. When both Eleanor and I were inside at the same time, one of us had to stand if the other needed to open the door. But it was a beginning. By 2018, we had 8 employees. Our annual revenue crossed $1.2 million. In 2022, Seattle Met Magazine ran a feature story about my business. The headline read, "From Teen Mom to Design CEO, the story of Erla Moore." The journalist spent 3 full days interviewing me. She asked about everything: getting pregnant at 16, being thrown out by my parents, losing Marcus, building a company while raising Lily on my own. I answered every question honestly except one. When she asked about my parents, I never said their names. It wasn't to protect them. It was to protect Lily from anyone who might connect her to people who had once decided she shouldn't exist. By 2024, Hearth Home Interiors had 22 employees and $4.2 million in annual revenue. My office sat on the corner floor of a building overlooking Capitol Hill. Some mornings I would stand by the window with a cup of coffee and watch the city wake up, still surprised that this life belonged to me. Lily was 19. She was a sophomore at the University of Washington studying psychology. She was smart, stubborn, and fearless in a way that made me proud and slightly terrified at the same time. She was everything I had hoped she would grow up to be. For 20 years, there had been absolutely no contact from the Moore family. Until last week. Tuesday, November 5th, 2024. 6:47 p.m. I had just returned from a client meeting with a tech executive renovating a waterfront property on Mercer Island. The contract alone was worth $800,000, and my mind was still full of fabric samples, lighting layouts, and floor plans when I turned onto my street. That was when I saw the car. A black Mercedes-Benz S-Class parked in front of my house. Oregon license plates. My heart stopped. I pulled into my driveway slowly and turned off the engine, but I didn't get out right away. Instead, I sat there gripping the steering wheel, staring at the two figures standing on my front porch. The man had gray hair now. His shoulders were slightly stooped, the confident posture I remembered softened by age. The woman beside him stood perfectly straight, just like she always had. Even from the driveway, I could recognize the rigid way she held her shoulders, like the world might fall apart if she relaxed for even a moment. 20 years had passed, but I knew exactly who they were. My father and my mother. I remembered that same rigid vigilance my mother had always carried with her, the way she guarded her carefully constructed world from anything that might disturb it. Daniel and Vivian Moore, my parents. I hadn't seen them in 20 years. For a moment, sitting in my car, I considered simply driving away. I could have turned the corner, checked into a hotel for the night, called Lily, and told her something unexpected had come up. I could have pretended this moment wasn't happening, but I wasn't 16 anymore. I was 36 years old. I owned a company. I had built a life from nothing after they erased me from theirs. I wasn't going to run. I stepped out of the car, closed the door behind me, and walked toward them. My father spoke first. "Erla, you look..." He paused, his eyes moving slowly over me. My coat, my leather bag, the house behind me. Well, he finished, though the surprise in his voice said more than the word did. "What are you doing here?" I asked. My mother stepped forward before he could answer. Time had added lines to her face, but the posture was the same. Perfectly straight. Controlled. Her hair was still dyed that careful shade of ash blonde that didn't quite match her age. "We know about your son, Erla," she said. I stared at her. "We know you have a son." The sentence hung in the air between us. "We'd like to meet him," my father added quickly. "We'd like to reconnect as a family." For a second, I thought I had misunderstood them. 20 years of silence. 20 years of pretending I didn't exist. And now they were standing on my porch asking to meet a grandson they had never bothered to know. A grandson who didn't exist. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. Instead, I stepped aside and opened the door. "Come in." Even now, I'm not completely sure why I let them inside. Maybe I wanted to hear exactly what had brought them back after 2 decades. Maybe part of me needed to see how far their version of reality had gone. My father walked into the living room like he was inspecting a property before making an offer. His eyes moved slowly across the hardwood floors, the custom built-in shelves, the framed artwork on the walls. My mother sat on the edge of the sofa with her hands folded in her lap, her back perfectly straight. "Your anniversary," I said after a moment. "That's why you're here." My father nodded. 50 years. He almost smiled. November 15th. We're hosting a celebration at the Heathman Hotel. About 200 guests. The mayor will be there. Pastor Collins. The Rotary Club board. He spoke about the event like it was the most important detail in the room. "What does that have to do with me?" I asked. My mother and father exchanged a quick glance. There have been questions, my mother said carefully. About you. About what happened 20 years ago. People talk? My father added. Some people remember that we had a third child. They've asked where you are, what happened to you. We've always told them you moved abroad, my mother continued. Started a new life somewhere else. But recently my father said those questions have become more persistent. I folded my arms. So you need me to make an appearance? My mother nodded. To show everyone that the Moore family is whole and happy again. Then she added the part that mattered most. We need your son. The room went completely still. We've told people about him, she said firmly. Our grandson. He represents the next generation of the Moore family. He should be there. I looked at them both. Who told you I have a son? My father waved his hand dismissively. That magazine article. The feature about your business. It mentioned that you have a child. He leaned back slightly in his chair. You've done better than we expected. Better than we expected? The words landed in the room like a quiet insult. As if my entire life had been some test they had been waiting to grade. And if I refuse? I asked. My father's jaw tightened. Let's not make this difficult, Arila. He opened the leather briefcase beside his chair and reached inside. When he pulled his hand back out, he was holding a check. Blank. My stomach twisted immediately. We're prepared to compensate you, he said calmly. He placed the check on my coffee table like it was a perfectly reasonable part of the conversation. $250,000. My mother nodded as if this arrangement was generous. You bring your son to the party, my father continued. Stay for 3 hours. Take a few family photographs. After that, you can return to your life. I looked at the check. Then I looked at my mother. She was watching me with the same patient expression she used when waiting for a child to agree to something obvious. As if this offer made perfect sense. As if 20 years of silence could be settled with a number written on a piece of paper. $250,000, I repeated slowly. The number sounded almost unreal sitting there on the coffee table between us. Is that what 20 years of silence costs? Neither of my parents answered immediately. My mother leaned forward first, lowering her voice like she was sharing an important secret. We're also prepared to reinstate you in the family trust, she said. My father nodded once, confirming it. The combined estate is currently valued at about $3.8 million, my mother continued. You would receive an equal share alongside Andrew and Claire. Her tone suggested this was an extraordinary offer, as if they were granting me something generous instead of trying to purchase my cooperation. For a moment I didn't respond. Instead, my mind drifted backward through time. I thought about the tiny studio apartment above the laundromat. I thought about the nights I had worked double shifts cleaning tables at a coffee shop while Lily slept in a small playpen behind the counter because I couldn't afford childcare. I thought about the years I spent building a business from nothing while my parents lived comfortably in their Portland home pretending I had never existed. 20 years of absence, 20 years of silence. And if I say no, I asked quietly. My father's expression hardened slightly. We would prefer not to involve your son directly, Arila, he said. But if necessary, we can reach out to him ourselves. The words were delivered calmly, but the meaning behind them was unmistakable. We could explain the situation, he continued. Help him understand his family history. A threat. Subtle, but perfectly clear. You want to contact my child, I said slowly, and tell him your version of what happened. My mother spread her hands as if she were the most reasonable person in the room. We want to be a family again, she said. Isn't that what you've always wanted? I opened my mouth to answer. But before I could speak, I heard footsteps coming from the staircase behind me. Everything changed in that moment. Mom? Is everything okay? I heard voices. Lily appeared at the bottom of the stairs holding a psychology textbook against her chest. She was wearing sweatpants and a University of Washington hoodie, her dark hair pulled into a messy ponytail. She looked exactly like what she was, a 19-year-old college student who had been studying in her room. My mother stood up immediately. Her expression shifted through confusion, calculation, and something very close to horror. "Who is this?" she asked. "This is Lily," I said calmly. I stepped slightly to the side so I was standing between my daughter and my parents. "My daughter. Your granddaughter." "My daughter," my father repeated. His voice cracked slightly. "But we were told?" "The article said?" "The article said I had a child," I interrupted. "You assumed the rest." Lily's eyes moved from me to the two strangers standing in our living room. Slowly, understanding began to settle across her face. "These are them," she said quietly. Her voice wasn't angry yet, just certain. "The grandparents who threw you out when you were pregnant with me." My mother flinched. "That's not exactly how it happened," she said quickly. "Things were more complicated back then." Lily crossed her arms. "Which part was complicated?" she asked. "The part where you kicked a 16-year-old girl out into the rain, or the part where you spent 20 years pretending she didn't exist?" "Young lady," my father began sharply. "I'm not your young lady," Lily cut in. "I'm the grandchild you never wanted to meet, the one you tried to erase before I was even born." Her voice stayed steady, but I could see the slight tremble in her hands. "I know everything," she continued. "Mom never hid it from me. I know about the letter. I know about the inheritance papers. I know you told everyone she moved overseas." The room went completely silent. My parents stared at her like they had just encountered something impossible. Lily turned toward me. "They came here for a grandson, didn't they?" she asked. "Someone they could show off." "Yes," I said quietly. Lily nodded once. Then she turned back to my parents and gave them a small, cold smile. "Surprise." My father recovered first. I watched his expression shift as the lawyer in him recalculated the situation. A new variable had entered the equation. "A granddaughter," he said slowly. That works. We can adjust the narrative." My father said, his voice calm again, as if this were simply another negotiation. "Lily can attend the party as what?" Lily interrupted before he could finish. She stepped forward slightly, folding her arms. "The secret granddaughter you've been hiding for 19 years, she asked. "The daughter of the teenage girl you threw out of the house." My mother's composure cracked for the first time that evening. "We could explain that you were studying abroad," she said quickly, her voice suddenly pleading. "That you've only recently returned. A surprise reunion. People would understand." Lily stared at her in disbelief. "I was born in Seattle," she said slowly. "I've never even left the country. And I'm currently a sophomore at the University of Washington." Then she laughed. There wasn't a trace of humor in the sound. "Do you even hear yourselves?" she said. "You want me to lie to 200 people about my entire existence just so your story looks neat." My father glanced down at his watch as if time were the only variable that mattered. "The party is on November 15th, he said. 10 days from now. We need your answer by the 10th. That was it. The negotiation was finished. I stood up. "I think you should leave." My father looked at me for a long moment, clearly weighing whether he wanted to argue further. My mother slowly stood as well, picking up her handbag. "Erla," she said quietly, "think about what we've offered." "I will," I replied. "But not tonight. Not with Lily here." They walked toward the door without another word. Just before stepping outside, my mother turned back. "This is an opportunity to heal," she said softly. "To put the past behind us. Don't let old wounds cost you your future." Then they left. I stood by the window and watched them cross the driveway toward their Mercedes. My father opened the passenger door for my mother, the same way he had done thousands of times before, like this was just another ordinary evening and not the strangest reunion in 20 years. The car pulled away slowly. When it disappeared around the corner, the house fell completely silent. Lily was the first to speak. "You're not actually considering this, are you?" I turned toward her. My daughter. This fierce, brilliant young woman I had raised on my own. The person my parents had tried to erase before she was even born. "No," I said. Then I added quietly, "But I'm not finished with them yet. Before we continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever stood where I stood that night, face to face with people who abandoned you when you needed them most, only to return years later because they suddenly needed something from you? If you were in my position, what would you do? I'd really like to know. Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to see how this story unfolds, make sure you subscribe, because what happened next was something even I didn't expect. That night, after Lily went upstairs and the house grew quiet, I went to my bedroom closet. At the very back, behind a stack of old boxes, sat a small fireproof lockbox. I hadn't opened it in years. I carried it to the bed, sat down, and lifted the lid. Inside were the documents of my erasure. The notarized letter dated November 14th, 2004. Signed by Daniel Moore and Vivian Moore. Witnessed by a notary public named Harold Brennan. I remembered the day my father mailed it to me. Certified mail signature required, as if he wanted to be absolutely certain I received it and understood exactly how thorough he had been. The document was 3 pages long, every line filled with airtight legal language declaring that Erla Moore forfeited all rights to the Moore family estate and that the Moore family held no legal or moral obligation toward me or any dependents. Any dependents. 3 words. That was how my daughter had been described before she was even born. Reduced to a clause in a legal document. I took out my phone and photographed each page carefully. Then I uploaded the images to my cloud storage and created several backup copies. "Mom," I looked up. Lily was standing in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself. "I couldn't sleep either," she said quietly. She walked into the room and sat beside me on the bed, looking down at the documents spread across the comforter. "Is that the letter?" she asked. "Yes." She picked up the first page and began reading slowly. When she finished, her eyes were bright with tears she refused to let fall. "They really did it," she whispered. "They really erased you like you were nothing." "They did," I said softly. She set the paper down and looked at me. "What are you going to do with these?" I studied the pages in front of us. 20 years of calculated cruelty captured in ink and signatures. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But whatever I do, they won't be able to pretend anymore." Lily nodded slowly. "I might have an idea," she said. The next morning, I made a phone call I hadn't made in more than a year. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Hello, Mrs. Torres." A warm laugh came through the line. "Erla, is that you, sweetheart?" I smiled despite everything that had happened. "Yes. It's me. I hope I'm not calling too early." "At my age, early is relative," Margaret Torres said with a soft chuckle. "What's wrong, sweetheart? You sound like you're carrying the weight of something heavy." I leaned back in my chair and took a slow breath before answering. Then I told her everything. I told her about my parents showing up at my door after 20 years of silence. I told her about the grandson they had invented and the anniversary party they were planning. I told her about the $250,000 sitting on my coffee table like a price tag attached to my past. When I finished speaking, the line went quiet. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then she sighed. "Those people," she said finally. 20 years, and they haven't changed one bit." Her voice carried a mixture of disappointment and something stronger beneath it. "Mrs. Torres," I said carefully, "I need to ask you something." "What is it?" "That night. November 14th, 2004. Do you remember it?" There was no hesitation in her response. I remember it like it was yesterday. Her voice hardened slightly as the memory came back to her. I was sitting in my living room when I noticed movement outside, she said. I looked through the window and saw you standing on your parents' porch. It was raining hard. You had that little suitcase at your feet. I closed my eyes, picturing the scene exactly the way she described it. I watched your parents' car drive away, she continued quietly. You stood there for several minutes after that. She paused. I should have come outside sooner, she said. I've regretted that every day since. I swallowed before asking the question that had been forming in my mind since the night before. Do you still have the security camera footage from back then? There was a short pause. Then she said something that made my heart beat faster. You know I never delete anything, she replied. Old teacher habit. Document everything. I'll check my files. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with an email notification. Attached was a single image. Grainy, dark, but unmistakable. A teenage girl standing on a front porch in the rain. A small suitcase beside her feet. In the corner of the image was a timestamp. 9:17 p.m., November 14th, 2004. Part of the house number was visible on the porch railing, just enough to identify the address. My parents' house. I called Mrs. Torres back immediately. That's you, she said as soon as she answered. That's the night they threw you away. I stared at the photo on my phone screen. Would you be willing to verify this officially if needed? I asked. Honey, she said firmly. I've been waiting 20 years for someone to ask. Her voice carried a strength I hadn't heard before. Whatever you need, I'm there. I thanked her quietly before hanging up. 2 pieces of evidence, 2 witnesses. Now all I needed was a plan. That evening, I sat at my desk and reread the article about me that had been published 2 years earlier. The Seattle Met feature was still online. According to the website, it had been shared more than 12,000 times since it first appeared in March of 2022. The journalist who wrote it, Rebecca Huang, had titled the story, From Teen Mom to Design CEO, The Story of Erla Moore. 2,500 words about lost survival and building a life from the ruins of everything you thought you knew. I remembered the interview clearly. Rebecca had spent 3 days following me around Seattle. She asked about Marcus, about Lily, about the business I built from nothing. I had told her the truth. Just not the whole truth. In the article I mentioned that I had become estranged from my family, but I never said their names. I never mentioned Portland or the Moore family or the law firm that had erased me. Not to protect them. To protect Lily. I didn't want strangers connecting her to people who had tried to erase her before she was born. Now I scrolled through the comments beneath the article. There were thousands of them. This woman is incredible. Imagine being thrown away by your own family and still becoming this successful. I went through something similar. This story gives me hope. Someone should make a movie about her life. Then one comment caught my attention. It had been posted only 2 weeks earlier. Does anyone know if she's related to the Moore family in Portland? The law firm people? Someone at my church mentioned it, and now I'm curious. I stared at the screen. So that's how they found me. My phone rang just as I was processing the thought. The name on the screen made me smile. Eleanor Vance. I answered immediately. Erla, she said, I heard through the grapevine that your parents suddenly materialized after 2 decades of silence. I laughed despite myself. News travels fast. This is Seattle, she replied. Everything travels fast. Her voice softened. What do you need? I'm not sure yet, I admitted. Advice, maybe. Perspective. There was a pause before she answered. What I do know, Eleanor said, is that you've spent 20 years proving exactly who you are without them. Don't let 3 hours at their party undo that. Eleanor was right. But by that point, I was already thinking about something much bigger than 3 hours. Thursday, November 7th, 2024. 3:42 p.m. My phone rang while I was reviewing fabric samples at my desk. The number on the screen had an Oregon area code I didn't recognize. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. I had already dealt with enough surprises from Oregon that week. Something made me answer anyway. Hello? There was a short pause. Arilla. It's Andrew. I froze. I hadn't heard my brother's voice in 20 years. It sounded deeper now, rougher with age. Not the voice of the 22-year-old who had stood at the upstairs window watching while I stood outside in the rain. This was the voice of a man in his 40s. Andrew, I said slowly. I know, he said quickly. I know I have no right to call. I know you have no reason to talk to me. He exhaled shakily. But there are some things you need to know before whatever happens next. I waited. Then talk, I said. The grandson story, he began. The whole thing about you having a son? That came from Mom. I closed my eyes. 2 years ago, she read that Seattle Met article about you, he continued. But she didn't read it carefully. She just saw the part about you having a child and running a successful business. Somehow she convinced herself that you had a son who was successful, some kind of entrepreneur, the next generation of the Moore legacy. She invented him. Andrew's voice cracked slightly. She told her church friends about him, the Rotary Club, her social circle. She built an entire story about this brilliant young man who would carry on the family name. And Dad? I asked quietly. He went along with it. Andrew let out a bitter breath. They've been telling people about your imaginary son for months. Even after everything, my parents' ability to reshape reality still managed to surprise me. Why are you telling me this? I asked. There was silence on the line for several seconds. Because I was a coward, Andrew said finally. Arilla. 20 years ago, I should have come downstairs that night. I should have said something. I should have stopped them. His breathing grew heavier as he spoke. Claire and I have talked about it for years. We know we were wrong. We've always known. And now I asked. Now I want to make it right, he said quietly. Whatever that looks like. He paused again. The anniversary party? Claire and I will be there? If you decide to come, you won't be alone. I didn't know what to say to that. Andrew kept talking. For the next hour, he told me things I had never fully understood when we were younger. The unwritten rules of being a Moore child. The pressure to perform. The constant need to meet expectations that shifted depending on what my parents wanted. Our parents used approval like a weapon, he said. They gave it when you followed their script. They took it away the moment you stepped out of line. He told me about Claire's children, 2 kids aged 8 and 11. She's terrified they'll grow up the way we did, he said. Always walking on eggshells, never knowing if they're good enough. Eventually, I asked the question that had been sitting quietly in the back of my mind. Why didn't you ever reach out in 20 years? There was a long pause. I almost did, Andrew admitted. 5 years ago, I found your number on your company website. I dialed it at least a dozen times. His voice dropped. And every time I hung up before it connected. Because if you answered, I'd have to admit what I let happen. And I wasn't ready. What changed? I asked. Watching them show up at your house demanding a grandson that doesn't exist. His voice hardened. Watching them try to buy you like you're a prop for their anniversary photos. Andrew exhaled slowly. It made me realize that if I don't say something now, I never will. And I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I failed you twice. I thought about the brother I remembered from childhood. The one who played board games with me when our parents were away at charity events. The one who taught me how to ride a bike in the backyard. There's something else you should know, Andrew said. What? The anniversary party. What about it? There's going to be a special family moment during the event. Pastor Collins suggested it. What kind of moment? A live stream, he said. The church Facebook page will broadcast it. 200 people in the room watching. And who knows how many online. I leaned back slowly in my chair. A live stream. 200 witnesses. Maybe thousands more online. Thank you for telling me, Andrew, I said. What are you going to do? I'm not completely sure yet, I replied, but I'm starting to see it more clearly. The next morning, my phone rang again. Friday, November 8th, 2024. 10:14 a.m. This time, I recognized the number immediately. Oregon. My father. I answered. He didn't bother with small talk. Arla Daniel Moore said, "We're running out of time. The party is in 1 week. $250,000. Full reinstatement into the family trust." His voice was calm, precise. Final offer. There was a short pause. I've been talking to Andrew. There was silence on the line for several seconds. Then my father spoke again. Andrew told you about the grandson story. Yes, I said. The one you've been telling people. The one you invented after reading an article you clearly didn't bother to understand. That's not entirely accurate, he replied stiffly. We may have embellished slightly. You invented an entire person, I said. You've been telling your friends about your brilliant grandson for months. A grandson who doesn't exist. Arla. My father's voice hardened. I don't appreciate your tone. After everything we're offering you, what exactly are you offering me? I interrupted. Money to show up and perform for your friends. A seat in a family trust you used to erase me. I forced my voice to stay calm. You're not offering me anything. You're trying to buy your way out of a lie you created. You have no right to judge us, he snapped. Now he was angry. You're the one who destroyed this family. You're the one who brought shame to our name. My hand tightened around the phone. I was 16 years old, I said quietly. I was pregnant, scared, and I needed my parents. And you threw me out like garbage and spent 20 years pretending I didn't exist. His silence lasted only a second. If you don't come to this party, Arla, he said coldly, you will never have another opportunity to be part of this family. I almost laughed. You said the same thing 20 years ago, I replied. And you know what? I built a better life without you than I ever could have had with you. We'll see about that, he said. Then he hung up. I sat in my office staring at the silent phone in my hand. My heart was pounding and my mind was racing. 1 week, 200 guests, 1 live stream. It was time to stop letting them control the story. That evening, I sat at my dining table with Lily and Eleanor. They want a performance, Eleanor said calmly, swirling the wine in her glass. They want you to show up, smile for the cameras, and validate 20 years of lies. They want to use you, Lily added. The same way they always have. Like something to manage, not someone to love. I looked at both of them. My mentor. My daughter. The family I had built for myself. I'm going to that party, I said. Lily's head snapped up. Mom. Not to give them what they want, I continued. To give myself what I need. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. On the screen were the photographs I had taken the night before. The disinheritance letter, Mrs. Torres's security footage from 2004, the Seattle Met article. They've spent 20 years controlling my story, I said quietly. Telling people I moved abroad. Inventing a grandson. Making me disappear. And you want to undo that? Eleanor said slowly. I want to tell the truth, I replied. In front of everyone who matters to them. On their stage, at their party, during their live stream. I took a slow breath. Not to humiliate them, but to stop letting them pretend I don't exist. I'm coming with you, Lily said immediately. Her voice was firm. They need to see who I really am. Not their imaginary grandson. Me. I reached across the table and took her hand. Are you sure? I asked softly. This could get messy. She didn't hesitate. I've spent my whole life knowing my grandparents chose their reputation over my existence, she said. I'm sure. Later that night, I called Andrew. Does your offer still stand? I asked. What offer? To stand with me if I come to the party. There was a pause. Then he said, Claire and I talked about it. We're ready. Good, I replied. Then I need you to do something. Anything. Don't warn Mom and Dad, I said. Don't tell them I'm coming. Another pause. Can you do that? Yes. Good. After we hung up, I stood by the window looking out across the Seattle skyline. The city lights stretched across the horizon, a reminder of the life I had built from nothing. 1 week from now, everything would change. Because in 7 days, my parents were going to learn what family actually meant. Saturday, November 15th, 2024, 6:47 p.m. The crystal ballroom at the Heathman Hotel looked exactly the way my parents would have designed it. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting warm light over perfectly arranged tables covered in starched white cloth. Flower arrangements sat in the center of each table, tall and extravagant enough that they probably cost more than my first month's rent in Seattle. Every detail was polished, every detail carefully planned, every detail designed to reinforce the same message my parents had spent 50 years cultivating. The Moore family was perfect. 200 guests stood beneath the chandeliers in formal evening wear, champagne glasses in hand, talking casually about golf handicaps, investment portfolios, and upcoming charity galas. The entire ballroom shimmered with wealth and polished appearances. Lily and I stood just inside the entrance. She wore a navy blue dress that was simple but elegant. I had chosen black. Professional. Quietly powerful. The kind of outfit that doesn't beg for attention but never gets ignored either. You okay, Lily? Whispered beside me. I squeezed her hand. I'm about to walk into my parents' 50th anniversary party and tell 200 people they've been lying for 20 years, I said softly. So yes, I'm terrified. That's not what I asked, she replied. I looked at her then. My daughter, this incredible young woman who had grown up knowing that her grandparents had tried to erase her before she was born, and yet she had built strength from that knowledge instead of letting it break her. Yeah, I said finally. I'm okay. We walked into the ballroom. At the far end of the room stood a raised platform where my parents were preparing to give their speeches. A camera crew had already set up the live stream equipment for Redemption Fellowship Church. On a monitor near the stage, I could see the Facebook Live indicator blinking red. And there they were. Daniel and Vivian Moore stood on the stage surrounded by smiling guests. My mother wore champagne-colored silk. My father stood beside her in a perfectly tailored navy suit. Both of them looked confident, relaxed, completely certain that the evening was unfolding exactly as planned. They hadn't noticed us yet. The room was too crowded and the attention too focused on them. But slowly, heads began to turn. Someone near the entrance whispered quietly, Is that her? The daughter from that article? The whispers spread outward through the crowd like ripples in water. And then my mother looked up. My father had just begun speaking. 50 years of marriage has taught me that family is everything, he said into the microphone. Vivian and I have built our lives around that principle, our children, our community, our faith. His voice echoed through the ballroom, amplified by the sound system and captured by the live stream cameras. 200 faces watched him with admiration. On the small monitor near the stage, I could see the comments appearing on the live broadcast. Beautiful couple. God bless the Moore family. What an inspiration. My mother saw me first. Her smile froze instantly. Her hand tightened around my father's arm. He followed her gaze and stopped speaking mid-sentence. Slowly, the room began to notice. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. The whispers grew louder. Someone near the back said clearly enough for several tables to hear, "That's her from the magazine. The design CEO." Another voice followed, "That's Daniel Moore's daughter. I thought she was living in Europe." My father recovered first. As I was saying, he began again, trying to regain control. Family has always been the foundation of everything. I started walking toward the stage. The crowd parted slightly as Lily and I moved forward. Not dramatically. Not like a movie scene. People simply stepped aside instinctively because they could feel that something important was about to happen. Lily walked beside me with her chin high and her steps steady. At the edge of the crowd, I saw Andrew. Claire stood beside him. Neither of them tried to stop me. They simply watched. Erla, my father, said into the microphone, his voice suddenly strained. What a surprise. We weren't expecting. I climbed the 3 steps onto the platform before he could finish. The live stream camera immediately followed my movement. 200 people stared. Thousands more were likely watching online. Hello, Dad, I said. Then I gently took the microphone from his hand before he could react. I turned toward the crowd. Hello, everyone, I said clearly. My name is Erla Moore. For those of you who don't know me, and judging by some of the whispers in this room, many of you don't, I am Daniel and Vivian Moore's youngest daughter. I paused. The one they told you moved to Europe 20 years ago. The silence that followed was absolute. I didn't move to Europe. I continued. On November 14th, 2004, 20 years ago tomorrow, my parents discovered that I was pregnant at 16 years old. That same night, they threw me out of their house. Someone in the audience gasped. I reached into my bag and removed a folded document. This is the letter my father mailed me 3 days later, I said, holding it up so the cameras could see. It states that I forfeited all inheritance rights and that the Moore family had no legal or moral obligation to me or any dependents. I gestured toward Lily standing beside the stage. That dependent was my daughter. Your granddaughter. The grandson my parents have been telling people about for months doesn't exist. They invented him after reading a magazine article about my business. My father lunged slightly toward the microphone. Erla, this isn't the place. When is the place? I asked, holding the microphone just out of his reach. When is the right time to tell the truth? You came to my house last week offering me $250,000 to bring a fictional grandson to this party. $250,000 to make your lie look real. I turned toward the audience. I didn't come here for money. I came here because I'm done being erased. Pastor Collins stepped forward from the crowd. Daniel, he said firmly, is this true? My father said nothing. My mother began to cry. In my entire childhood, I had only seen Vivian Moore cry once before at her own mother's funeral. Now tears streamed down her face, ruining the careful makeup she had spent hours applying. Daniel, the pastor, repeated. I asked you a question. My father looked at the room full of people who had respected him for decades. The mayor, church elders, business leaders. He searched for words. Finally, he said quietly, it was a difficult time. We made decisions that you threw me out because I was pregnant. I said calmly, because your reputation mattered more than your child. Andrew stepped onto the stage. Claire followed him. She's telling the truth, Andrew said. Claire and I watched from the upstairs window while our parents put our 16-year-old sister out in the rain. We said nothing. That was our failure. The whispers in the room exploded into a roar. Phones appeared everywhere as people began recording. The mayor quietly moved toward the exit. Mrs. Torres Y called. A gray-haired woman stood near the back of the room. Our neighbor from 20 years ago. She saw everything. Margaret Torres lifted her chin proudly. I watched that girl stand in the rain for 10 minutes, she said. Then I gave her a place to sleep. The Moore family never once asked where she went. The live stream comments were flying past faster than anyone could read. This is unbelievable. Those poor girls. Call the news. Within minutes, everything my parents had built for 50 years began to crumble under the weight of 3 minutes of truth. I handed the microphone back to my father. I didn't come here to destroy you, I said quietly, so only those on stage could hear. I came here to stop being invisible. Then I faced the crowd again. 20 years ago, I was thrown out with nothing, I said. Today, I run a design company in Seattle with 22 employees and over $4 million in annual revenue. My daughter is a sophomore at the University of Washington. We built our lives without the Moore family's help. Lily stepped onto the stage beside me. I'm Lily Hale, she said into the microphone. The granddaughter they never wanted. I'm 19 years old. I've spent my entire life knowing my grandparents chose their reputation over my mother and over me. She looked directly at them. You could have known me. You could have watched me grow up. You chose not to. She handed the microphone back and stepped away. Behind us, the ballroom erupted into chaos. As we reached the doors, I turned back one final time. One more thing, I said loudly. I'm not going to sue you. I'm not going to fight for your money. But if you ever lie about me or my daughter again, I will release every document I have. I have the disinheritance letter. I have photographs. I have witnesses. And now I have 200 witnesses to this conversation. Eleanor appeared beside me. Ready? She asked. Yes. Lily squeezed my hand as we stepped into the cold November night. For the first time in 20 years, I could breathe. Mom, she asked quietly. Did we do the right thing? I thought about the 16-year-old girl standing in the rain with one suitcase. We told the truth, I said. That's not revenge. That's justice. And finally, the story that had been buried for 20 years belonged to me again. Living through this taught me that being rejected by the people who raised you doesn't erase your value. Sometimes it simply pushes you to build a life that proves your strength in ways they never expected. I learned that truth may take years to surface, but when it does, it can free more than just one person. If you had stood where I once stood, facing the people who turned their backs on you and then came back when it was convenient, what would you have done? I'd really love to hear your thoughts. And tell me, where in the world are you listening from today? If this story touched you even a little, consider subscribing, leaving a comment, or sharing this video. A simple action from you might help this story reach someone who feels invisible right now. In a quiet way, you could be the reason another person finds the courage to keep going.